Hi, welcome to the Leadership Standard. I'm Jamie Mason Cohen, the host. I am so excited to introduce our guest today. Dorie Clark helps individuals and companies get their best ideas heard in a crowded, noisy world. She's been named one of the top 50 thinkers in the world by Thinkers 50. She was honored as the #1 communication coach by the Marshall Goldsmith Leading Global Coaches Awards and one of the top 5 communication professionals in the world by Global Gurus. She's a keynote speaker and teaches for Columbia Business School. She's the Wall Street Journal bestselling author of The Long Game, which I can't wait to dive into, Entrepreneurial You, Reinventing You, and Stand Out, which was named the #1 leadership book of the year by Inc. magazine. A former professional campaign spokeswoman, Clark has been described by the New York Times as, I quote, an expert at self-reinvention and helping others make change in their lives. She's a frequent contributor to the Harvard Business Review and consults and speaks for clients such as Google, Yale University, and the World Bank. And if that's not all interesting enough, she is the graduate of Harvard Divinity School, a producer of a multi-Grammy-winning jazz album, and a Broadway investor. Welcome to the Leadership Standard, Dorie Clark.
Jamie, I'm so glad to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate it, and I can't wait to dive in. What I would really like to start off with is, who influenced you growing up?
Whoa, we're going way back. Well, there's a lot of directions that we could take, but I actually want to give a shout out to my 7th grade English teacher, Mrs. Herlocker. She actually was very rigorous, and she did something that is not very popular these days. And honestly, a lot of people my age or younger, I don't think literally ever received this information. But in 7th grade, she taught us about grammar. And you can see why people would want to skip that. I mean, it's just, it's like a little boring and a little rote and a little dry. It's much sexier if you're trying to get kids interested in language at all to just do books or things like that maybe have a better chance of drawing them in. But I actually continually fall back on the knowledge that I gleaned about basic grammatical rules. And I feel like it's unfair and unfortunate that most people were never taught those hard and boring but really necessary things. And it's been really helpful to me ever since.
I can imagine, as an author and as a speaker, it also ties into the long game on some level, because these were lessons that you had no clue they would be beneficial and useful to you decades later.
Yeah, I think it's true. I mean, fundamentally, playing the long game, whether we're talking about it as a colloquial expression or, essentially the theme of the book that I wrote, is about delayed gratification. Are we able to step up and be the people who resist eating the marshmallow, or do we stuff it in our face right now? And the more we can be willing to defer, the more we can amass a huge and significant pile of marshmallows, maybe both, down the road. And so I think that is a really powerful muscle that we can learn to exercise.
Can you elaborate on the long game? What is the long game, and why did you write it?
So the subtitle of my book, it's the long game, how to be a long-term thinker in a short-term world. And I think that for almost every professional, for almost every executive, we feel this acutely. We want to be strategic. That's a goal that we all have. But it also feels like almost everything in the world is mitigating against it. You have shareholder pressure if you're publicly traded. You have boss pressure if you have a boss. You have board pressure if you're a CEO. And people want results, and they want to see that things are working. And you can understand, of course, why they want to do that. I mean, nobody wants to be the sucker who gets really, really far down the road before they realize they're going in the wrong direction. But it's also true that there are many things legitimately in life and in business that take a while to show results. And this is a real case of, the wisdom in knowing the difference. How can we be smart enough and be discerning enough to understand, okay, this is probably going to take a while to show any results. For a long time, it might look like it's not even working, but this is the place where we have to exercise strategic patience and strategic faith to know that eventually it will work and it will turn those results. And by then we'll have left our competitors behind because they weren't willing to make that investment. But you have to be really discerning to make sure you're not just being careless. So it's a hard and thoughtful line that we have to walk.
You talked about strategic patience. And I was telling my wife, Karen, earlier today, I read about, I would say 40 to 50 business books a year. So between the time that I read your book and now, over the past year, 2023 to now, I think this was my favorite book. And here's why. It had a wonderful balance between the strategy, which is honestly what I came for, is what are the strategies that are going to help me become a better long-term thinker, and story. And you made yourself the centerpiece in some ways, although you give these excellent case studies of a person who walked their talk when it came to playing the long game. And it was the stories of how you were vulnerable, how you made mistakes along the way, how you experienced rejection and almost self-doubt, or maybe not self-doubt, maybe moments of wondering when it's going to happen for you, especially in this 5-year window on your way to become who you are. That inspired me. It reinforced certain things that you and I met in 2017 when I was early on in my 7-year journey as being a professional speaker and all the other things that are connected to it. And I remember meeting you at this gathering in 2017. I didn't know anybody in that room in Philadelphia. These were a group of some of the leading speakers in North America who came together, and I was lucky enough to be invited in by one of these people. And there was Dorie Clark, who sat at this little table with me and a few other people, and you couldn't have been more open. You already, in my mind, had established yourself as a leading business thinker, like Seth Godin calls you. And there you were, and you asked me, "Hi, Jamie, I'm going to get coffee. Do you want one?" And I don't know why I was blown away by that, but instantly I felt this sense of psychological safety, this feeling of trust, this feeling of belonging. And I said, "Yes, please." And I went in my wallet to get some money. "No, it's fine." And you came back, and I ended up going and talking with Stephen Shapiro and Allison Levy, all these different interesting people who now I call friends. And I really give you the credit in that moment of just helping me relax because of the way you wanted nothing, had no agenda. You were just being a kind person in that moment.
Well, thank you, Jamie. I really appreciate it. I literally remember none of that. So I appreciate you mirroring that back to me. I remember meeting you in a general sense, but not our little coffee exchange. But that's really wonderful because, yeah, ultimately, one of the themes that I actually talk about in the long game is relationship building and connections. And, ultimately, if we want to accomplish anything, we need the people around us. We need our network to be able to help us do that. And a problem that I see so often in the corporate world is that people are focused on outcomes way too soon. And so one of my little controversial declarations in the book is I talk about the 1-year rule, where we should all wait a minimum of a year before we ask for any meaningful favors from the people that we meet, because we need to have that year essentially as a friendship incubation process. We need to get literally any idea of personal gain out of our heads, not, oh, he could introduce me to his agent or she could introduce me to her, the people who hired her for a speech or whatever. Just get it gone so that you can focus on getting to know someone and being their friend. And then once you are their friend, anything can happen because friends want to help each other. But those early stages, we have to really have a clean and clear agenda about just getting to know folks.
And on getting to know folks, this was my favorite chapter. This was the chapter that I was reflecting, projecting, asking myself how I could do better when things didn't go as I would have wanted when it came to networking, which has, as you mentioned in the book, for some people, it feels dirty and it feels, some even the way my body language now, it just feels like something that's like that I don't want to do. I don't have time to. I'm busy. You are one of the most extraordinary. I don't even like the word networking, because we talked in your book, you talked about short-term networking, and then you talked about, you had different ways you described it, but it's a different form of networking that sees people as, I want to meet this person, like you said, as because they're interesting. I don't know if they can help me or I can help them. And I'm not going to ask them for anything. I'm just going to get to know them like a friend, like someone who is worth getting to know. And you have walked your talk. So the reason I brought up the story about when you and I met was because everything I read in the book, this was just a kernel, even though it was just like a 3-minute interaction, which you don't even remember because you're out in the world and meeting so many incredible people, yet it had an impact on me. And what I'd like to ask you is, can we go back to the beginning of your journey to where you are now? And can you tell a story or two about, like you did in the book, about the kind of networking that helped you become a type of person who other people would want to get to know, and that helped you go into these different directions as one of the leading experts, business thinkers, you're a Grammy award-winning producer, and on and on.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Jamie. Absolutely. One story that I actually share in the long game that I feel like exemplifies this in a lot of ways relates to the music producing, because lots of people immediately say, "Oh, well, are you a jazz musician? How did you do this? How did you get to be a producer of a jazz record?" And of course, that would be a very logical inference. But I am not a jazz musician. I can't play any of those instruments. I have no background whatsoever in jazz. The way that I got to be a producer on this Grammy-winning record, I got to go to the Grammys, I got to walk on the red carpet, I get to be on stage at the Grammys and help accept this award, all these really cool things. And it literally came from networking, because there was a gentleman that I had gotten to be friends with. And basically I had done him a favor. I knew that he was interested in trying to connect with an opera composer. Like he really wanted to write an opera, but he was not a musician himself. He wanted to write the libretto or the so-called book for the opera, and he needed a musician collaborator to help him with that. And as it happened, super randomly, I knew an opera composer. And so I not only brought them together, I actually tried to make it especially fun. So I threw a party just for musicians. It was like a musician themed party. So I invited everybody in my life who was a professional musician or adjacent to that. And so we had, just this grand time at my house. And the goal of it, though, was to hook these two people up. And I did get them in the same room. I got them talking. I'm like, oh, this guy really wants to write the opera. So they started collaborating on that. And essentially, as a thank you, he brought me in on another project that he was involved in. And it ended up leading to a Grammy, which was incredible.
Yeah, because I was so interested in that part of your background that I didn't know and hadn't heard of before, how you are such this Renaissance human of so many dimensions. And I'm always interested in people like that because for the journey. How did they get there? What would be 2 or 3 examples of short-term transactional networking that you see often doesn't lead people to where they want to go in the business world, in leadership? And what would be 1 or 2 examples of, along these lines, of the type of relationship building networking over the long term that you've seen work?
Yeah, so I think most of us can probably come up with examples of the short term, how not to do it. I mean, I remember there was a guy that I think I must have met him at a gathering or a party or something. And so the next day he, sends me a friend request on LinkedIn. Okay, great. Yep, I'll connect with this guy. No problem. But he immediately sends me a follow-up message saying, oh, hi, I see you write for Harvard Business Review. Can you introduce me to your editor? And, in his world, this is probably not an inappropriate request, but it also, first of all, it's sort of like, oh, so that's why you want to know me, right? It kind of colors it because you feel like, oh, okay, I'm sort of serving an instrumental purpose to you. So that's one knock. And then the other thing is just, honestly, it's a bit of a lack of understanding or empathy, because, even would have been slightly better if he had said, oh, I really want to do this. Could I get your advice about it or something? Because a hard ask for an introduction to an editor or to anybody, whether it's sort of a high status person, it could be a literary agent, it could be your boss, it could be a famous person you're connected to, whatever it is, they are inundated with requests. And so it requires a certain amount of political capital on your part to make the introduction. They're busy people, you're vouching for them. And so the question is it comfortable for you to vouch for this person? And this guy, I had talked to him for a minute and a half. I didn't know him at all. The answer is no, sorry, I'm not comfortable vouching for you because I don't know enough about you. If I had known him for a year and we'd been friends, then I would have enough context to be like, oh, he's so smart, he's a great guy, he's going to write great articles for you. But I wasn't in a place where I could successfully say that. And so I had to, find a polite way to distance myself from that request, which feels weird. It feels bad for the person, but it's because he jumped the gun. So Meanwhile, if we take it to the other extreme, how do you, the term that I have for it is infinite horizon networking, where, doesn't matter. Like, you're a cool person. I don't care what you can do for me. Like, you seem interesting. It actually can be really interesting what comes of it. You really don't know what is going to be relevant to you in a number of years. And so in my book, The Long Game, I actually tell a story about this guy that lived in Israel, and he was volunteering for like a charity for refugees, basically. And so he was just doing this volunteer thing. And so he was working with this guy who was the volunteer coordinator. Okay, great. They knew each other through that. He'd participate and help out with stuff. Anyway, like several years later, the volunteer coordinator guy gets a job at the Technion, which is the country's basically MIT, like their most prestigious technical university. And the guy's job is working in the tech accelerator. And so it turns out the person who had been doing the volunteer was a startup entrepreneur. The dude who now works at the Technion invited him, oh, hey, would you like to come in and speak? Would you like to be a judge of this startup competition? He's like, yeah, this is great. Like, all of a sudden he has all this access at the top technical university. He ended up like creating a venture capital deal out of it. It was amazing. And it was through what seemed to him an incredibly unlikely source of this dude from a volunteer effort years before. So because we don't know where people will end up, it's always interesting and meaningful to take the time to just get to know people and make friends.
Yeah, it really is focusing on the journey and not the destination.
Yeah. What are some examples in your life, Jamie? Did this resonate with you in a personal way? Like, have you had experiences of this kind of infinite horizon networking?
Oh, most definitely. I ended up working at Saturday Night Live. So people often ask, how did that happen? Well, I called Lorne Michaels' office 25 times before his assistant said, what would it take for you to stop calling? But what happened was, eventually his assistant, who I became friends with when I worked there, said, okay, I can, set up a meeting, no guarantees. So when I went in and I got that meeting, I was backstage at 30 Rock in the writer's room, and there was a gauntlet of black and white photos on the wall of people we grew up watching. If you watch Saturday Night Live, like Mike Myers and, Gilda Radner and these types of legendary figures, I got in to see Lorne Michaels, and we started talking, and I found out that my uncle and my dad lived somewhat nearby, and that there was some similarities. And it even was to the point where my grandmother knew his grandmother, and that led to a conversation where I think he felt more of a connection. I had to take the first step, and I can think of several other instances as well where that's why when even in the speaking world, I invited this, I haven't told the story, but I invited Mark Bowden, who we both know, who I didn't know. I saw him at a TEDx event to speak at a school I was teaching at. And he did it for very little. He was very generous about it. And then at the end of it, I hired him to coach me in my TEDx talk that I gave in Luxembourg. And it worked out. And I hired him. He saw the value that I brought and we stayed in touch. And then he introduced me to the speaker group in which I met you.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah. So that's more of a direct line than the SNL, but I think what I got from the long game in that chapter was it's important to keep putting yourself out there, to add value, to show your worth. I think sometimes, you didn't say it explicitly, but I found that sometimes hiring people, like showing that you value their time, the top experts, they respect that if they see something in you. And so it's an immediate way of saying, I value your time, I value your experience, and not asking them for anything, giving in that way. So it's really looking out for ways to add value to other people in ways that you might not have expected unless you put yourself out there.
Yeah, I think that's really smart, actually. And I can think about it in my own life. I run an online course and community called Recognized Expert, and there's a lot of people I meet and a lot of people I come across, and I'm always trying to learn about them. But it's true that I feel like I have more of a responsibility for, or sort of a stake in the success of people who are a part of my course and community. Like, to a certain extent, it's like this, fiduciary thing of like, okay, they entrusted me with, registering for this course. I want to do right by them. So it's true, honestly, that if we think about sort of getting through the noise, I am paying a higher degree of attention to who they are and what they're doing. And therefore, it is more emblazoned in my mind when there are opportunities where I can slot them in and how I can help them with ideas and suggestions and referrals and things like that. So I think that's really right on.
On that note, if you had one piece of advice that you've given the most in terms of a pattern of things that you've tried to address in your Recognized Expert community, which has over 800 people, what is that piece of advice?
Probably the most common and foundational is that if you want to be recognized for your expertise, you need to be sharing your ideas publicly so that it enables people to have a vehicle to hear about you. If you don't share your ideas publicly, I mean, some people will hear about you because the people who you work with directly will know about you, and maybe they might tell some people. But that's always going to be a fairly small number of people, kind of incremental growth, because honestly, there's only so many people you can work with, right? But if you are sharing your ideas publicly, and there's a lot of ways you can do it, it can be podcasts, it can be TEDx talks, it can be articles. If you work in a corporation, it could even be just making more of an effort to speak up in meetings or being willing to chair a committee or something like that. But if you can make your ideas publicly accessible and visible, first of all, those artifacts are shareable. If you gave if you spoke on a panel at a conference and now there's a video, well, more people can see that video. But it's a way of codifying it, and it begins to gain momentum so that people can think of you not just as a nice person or whatever, but as someone who really is contributing to the discourse. And that travels a lot further and a lot faster when it comes to building your reputation publicly.
Yes, and one thing I'm going to add that you talk about in the book along those lines is what seemed to be a common, not complaint from people was, well, I've been sharing my ideas for 2 years and I'm not getting much traction outside my company or outside my circle of professional associates. Now what? And what I saw over and over again in the book through the different examples is you counseling them and showing them that it takes sometimes a little bit longer than that, like it did for you. How long did it take for you from the time you wrote your first article to getting traction and becoming a well-known article writer in Harvard Business Review, in writing your first book? What was the gap for you?
Yeah. So for me personally, I really started making a push around attempting to break in and write for high profile publications in around 2009, 2010. And my first book was published in 2013. And that's not for lack of trying. It just takes a while, first of all, to be able to even get a book contract, because my first attempts were all roundly rejected because the publishers were just saying like, well, you're not famous enough, come back later when you're more famous. and so I needed to write a certain number of articles so that people could actually see like, oh, okay, I guess she does have some places where she's sharing her ideas. But also, once you sign a book contract, it takes usually a couple of years from that point if you're publishing commercially for it to come out. So there's definitely a lag. It also wasn't until 2013 that I got my first paid speaking engagement. I mean, paid more than like whatever, $100 or something, meaningfully paid speaking engagement. And I had been speaking, absolutely, on stages for hundreds of people, about 7 years by that point. So it was a lot of talks and a lot of things. And this is something I know, of course, you're very actively involved as a keynote speaker, so you know this well. But there's a lot of people that are very interested in paid speaking as a career. And I always tell them, unfortunately, I would love this not to be the case, but the speaking is kind of the lagging indicator rather than the leading indicator. It's often the last piece that falls into place. And you have to do a lot of brand building and platform building because no matter how good of a speaker you are, people oftentimes don't want to take a risk on someone unless their brand is really considered platinum in the marketplace.
Yeah, and even our timeline, I'm a little bit older than you, but not much in terms of the journey as well. But I did I did about 200 free talks between 2006 and my TEDx talk. And people say, how did you just like show up and get a TEDx talk? Well, I've been talking between 2006 globally, from Malaysia to New York to Toronto, every opportunity I could, even before the business stuff, in education, in communication, in entertainment. Whenever anybody said, would you do a little talk? Yes, my hand went up. And so by the time I ended up getting paid, when we met in 2017, I had an agent then, barely, but all these things had led up to, beneath the iceberg, I had paid some dues and not expecting much in return leading up to that point. So I think when people want to pick my brain too on speaking, it's some of the answers they don't want to hear. It's like, well, how long oh, I did one at the Chamber of Commerce. I'm like, wonderful. Do 100 more of those. What? 100? Yeah. Try to do 100 more of those and don't expect anything. Not even.
No, but Jamie, just be real with me. How do you get an agent?
Right.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Right. The agent too. Like these are the conversations. Well, agents want people who are already established on some level, who are making X amount. They don't want to hear those things. So again, why did I relate so much to the long game? And it inspired me to continue even to the next level, is because it's relatable, it's accurate, and it's inspiring because you are at the top of your game.
Thank you.
I would love to do a speed round with you. Very short answers. That might relate to the long game, might not. That I'm just curious. My CQ, like Don Yeager, who we interviewed here, 12-time bestselling author, he calls it the CQ, the curiosity quotient of some of the leading people who he's known in coaching and sports. So if that's okay with you, I'm going to just rattle off these questions.
Let's do it.
Ready? Your favorite book?
My favorite book is Influence by Robert Cialdini.
Mm-hmm. Still influential after 40 or 50 years, right?
It definitely stands the test of time, that's for sure.
Your favorite play?
Favorite play? I'm going to cheat a little bit and answer musical. My favorite musical is Rent.
Yes. I remember seeing that in New York when I first arrived in New York. Incredible. What's your definition of success?
I think my definition of success is just self-actualization, kind of on the Maslow hierarchy of needs. It's doing the highest and best use for yourself.
What do the most successful business leaders who you know have in common?
A relentless willingness to decide and to accept the consequences of their decisions and trade-offs.
And finally, in your book, The Long Game, you talk about white noise. What is it, and why might it matter to those who want to live a fulfilled life?
Oh, nice. I have lots of theories about white noise, but do you mean white space by chance?
White space. Thank you.
All right, absolutely.
That's a different thing. That's awesome.
I mean, white noise is good too. I love it. But
I was testing you to see if you know the theories in your own book.
It's true. The book came out before ChatGPT did, so I feel like I'm safe on that front. But yeah, so white space. So white space, as I'm talking about it, is really literal. It is, if you open your calendar, how much of it is covered in, black ink if you are analog, or, blue splotches if you're digital, versus how much is white, how much is unspoken for. Because ultimately, when it comes to strategy, when it comes to strategic thinking, a myth that I think many of us have is that we need so much time for strategic thinking. Oh, I just don't have time for strategic thinking. And so we put it off. We kick the can down the road and we don't do it. It's not that you need huge swaths of time for strategic thinking, but it is true that you need some time. And so if you look at your calendar and it is just awash in ink, you are not going to have the space necessary to be able to step back and actually ask important questions like, wow, I have, 40 meetings this week. Do I actually need all of these meetings? Why am I in these meetings? Is there a problem I could solve upstream so I don't have to be in all of these meetings, et cetera, et cetera? We need just a little bit break so that we can actually look down from 30,000 feet and try to solve some of the problems up front so that we're not constantly caught in this treadmill of execution. So the first step is being absolutely relentless about guarding your time and guarding your calendar, and, sometimes being a little mean and saying no. But it is necessary to ensure that you have the strategic space so that you can make use of all the other hours in your day and your week.
Yeah. And how do you do it?
So and this is hard for most people, myself included, because you want to be nice, you want to be liked, etc. But I have really learned over time that if I don't want to do something, if I'm not, sort of saying, oh, yes, I'm so excited about it, I need to decline politely and quickly. I often used to find myself in a problem where I would feel bad saying no, and then I would put it off, and it would just languish in my inbox. And then it would, okay, I've waited 2 weeks, and then, the person is sort of following up well, did you get my message? And then you feel guilty because you took too long getting back to them. And it's like you're compounding problem upon problem. And so instead, what I've really learned to do is just rip the Band-Aid off. And if I can't do something, but also if I don't want to do something, if it's not serving me, I will say no. I mean, just as an example, I got an email the other day from my publisher, and a woman from my publisher who handles bulk sales wants to know, oh, could we have a strategy call? Could we have a planning call together about bulk sales opportunities? Now, really what this means, this is not them giving me strategies. It's them wanting to go through my speaking calendar with me and them saying, well, have you asked them about bulk sales? Well, how about them? Have you asked them about bulk sales? And, I'm always trying to be conscious of, doing bulk sales for my books. That's a good thing to do. But that helps. That's me helping her do her job rather than the other way around. I don't actually need to be spending my time like that. So I sent her a very nice note back and said, gosh, thanks so much. I will always have bulk sales on the brain. I will be mindful. Thank you so much for the reminder. I am really heads down on other things now, so I can't talk on the phone, but know that I'm thinking of you. And, I'm like, good. I've just saved myself 30 minutes. That felt good.
That's a great example. I can picture you having that conversation on the other side of Zoom. What's been your biggest challenge and how did you overcome it?
Oh my goodness. I mean, if we're thinking about just challenges in general, um, they always say, Jamie, that the most important decision you make to facilitate your career is actually a personal decision, which is about, partnerships and romantic relationships. And so the hardest decision that I ever had, which I do now feel very proud of, is breaking up with someone, this is now years ago, but someone I really, really loved very much, but who was not good for me. And it took me longer than it should have. And it was very hard and very draining and upsetting, but I knew it was the right thing to do because I realized that if we were together permanently, it would just handicap everything down the road. And I knew I would be kind of cutting off future possibilities for myself. So I had to just bite the bullet and have a really, really awful breakup. But I'm proud that I did.
Well, I love that you gave that example and showed a little bit vulnerability, yet it's also so relatable. I think Dale Carnegie talks about that and how to stop worrying and start living. Chapter 7 is that the partner you choose, if you choose to be in a relationship, is the most important decision you can make in your life, personally and professionally. Yeah, I relate to that. After I met my wife, at the time, we started dating, everything in my life, my whole trajectory, I felt changed for the better. Like just there was everything amplified, so much positive energy and having that person there every step of the way to, not just as a partner, but to encourage, to consult with, to be your best friend. Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, that's a lovely testament to her. That's great.
Thank you. When you're working on a new project, and you're often working on a new project, what are the daily habits or routines do you follow to go from point A to point Z?
So I'm not a sort of religious daily habits person. I'm not, waking up at 7:02 a.m. with a gratitude journal kind of level of specificity. But I will say that the most important thing for me when I am heads down on a new project, and in fact, I am in this space right now, I'm working on a big sort of extended project right now. The most important thing is having this actually goes back to the white space conversation. It's having large just blocks of focus time that's not broken up with other things. So today, for instance, to use the terminology that Paul Graham introduced, today for me is a manager day. I have a bunch of phone calls, but I'm doing podcasts, I'm doing networking calls, I'm doing coaching calls, all the things that one has to do. And they're all kind of sandwiched together today. And, I've gotten more sane over the years. So I do have a lunch break and things, but it's a busy day with phone calls. But meanwhile, yesterday, I only had one meeting, and that was actually even an accident. I'm traveling tomorrow, so otherwise I would have booked 0 because I need to be able to go deep and have a high level of concentration when I'm doing a large project. Because for me, if I'm working on a book, I will do 3,000 or 4,000 words in a day. Like I can be enormously productive, but I need to have extremely uninterrupted time. And so protecting that is what's really critical there.
Mm-hmm. A few more questions and then we'll wrap it up if that works for you. If you look back on your life, is there anything you wish you'd do more of and anything you wish you'd done less of?
Those are good questions. I think that, it's interesting. I probably like a lot of people, I didn't really get into fitness at all until I was in my 40s and then was like, I need to not, it was like loss aversion. Like I need to stop the decline. And so suddenly it became very relevant. But from what I understand, it probably everything would have been better and nicer if I had actually, like in my 20s, somehow realized in a proactive way that fitness was a useful thing to do. So did the best I could, but I was really not interested for a long time. Um, in terms of things to do less of, um, that's a good question overall. I am not sure. I will have to think about that.
Okay, because we also had Daniel Pink on the show, and we talked about regret. And so now that type of question is on my mind. It's interesting to hear uh, how successful people frame the past and what came out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always an interesting question.
This can be an annoying question, but this is a question that I still find is a good way to end a conversation. What's next?
So in a literal sense, what's next is another theme that I talk about in the long game is the importance of 20% time. Sort of borrowing the concept from Google and then before them 3M of having time that we allocate to experimental projects. And the thing about the experimental project, because it's an experiment, is it may work, it may not work, it may take a long time to work, etc. But we're not too exercised about it because it is a relatively small part of our portfolio. And so it's not the end of the world if it doesn't pan out. And so in my case, for 8 years now, I have been working on my side project of learning to write musical theater. And so actually something that is coming up, I wrote a show called Absolute Zero. It's an all-female spy musical. And it is, we actually had our first production in April at Ohio Wesleyan University. We're going to be doing a workshop production at Vassar and this summer. So we're starting to get a little traction on the 20% time, which is very exciting.
I love that. And in the book, it shows your whole trajectory of when you first had the inkling or the seed of opportunity within you that this is something that you would like to pursue. So it's so cool to hear it now in the what's now come to fruition in the present.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to the point of strategic patience, one of the biggest things that I learned in the process of writing the long game. I mean, we know this is true mathematically when it comes to things like investment returns, but it turns out it's also true in our careers and in our lives. The thing about compound interest, not just of money, but of time and effort and connections and things like that, is that progress is really slow in the beginning, kind of looks like it's not happening. And then by the time you get toward the end of a cycle, it actually is accelerating really dramatically. And so learning to write musicals and writing a successful musical was a 10-year goal for me. And, for many years, there's not much happening. And now we're in year 8 and there's actually a lot happening. And so you can really see that the compound value of time when you invest it.
Yeah. And you are the quintessential example of what you preach. Dorie, if our listeners and viewers want to find out more about how they can connect with you and learn more about all that you have to offer in your books, your courses, your speeches, your workshops, where would they find you?
Jamie, thank you so much. It's great talking to you. And for folks who want to learn more, my website is dorieclark.com. I have more than 700 free articles there. And I also have a free long game strategic thinking self-assessment that folks can get. And you can download that for free at dorieclark.com/thelonggame.
Dorie, I cannot thank you enough for our conversation about success, leadership, relationship building the right way, the most important relationship in your life, and so much more. Thank you for your time.
Jamie, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Leadership Standard, brought to you by TEC Canada. We hope you found inspiration and actionable insights from today's conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. To learn more about TEC Canada and how we help leaders achieve their personal and professional goals, visit tech-canada.com. Until next time, keep leading with excellence.